You know, words have power, right? Especially when they're coming from a president. Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to dig into the source material to really understand one single super potent word, hate, and what it means when it shows up in American politics like never before.
Okay, so this right here, this is the quote that basically kicked off a huge national conversation. It comes from a speech back in mid-2025, and honestly, it's the jumping off point for our entire explainer. The words are just so direct, so personal, and they're aimed right at his political opponents.
And when you hear that, you can't help but wonder, right? Like, has any other US president ever said something like this out loud? Is this totally new? Or are we just kind of forgetting a history of leaders being this open about hating their rivals?
All right, so here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll look at what was actually said and the context around it. Then, we're going to jump back in time and see how past presidents talked. That'll help us figure out if this is really a first. And finally, we'll get into the big one, the impact of these words.
Okay, let's dive right into our first section, a president declaring hate. We've got to be super clear about what we're looking at here.
So we're zeroing in on a handful of public comments that were made in the middle of 2025. And just so we're all on the same page, this isn't us guessing or anything. This is all coming from widely documented, reported statements. It's all in the public record.
So what exactly was said? And maybe even more important, why was it said? Let's get into the nitty-gritty and break down the remarks and their context. Okay, so the sources actually point to two key instances where this kind of language popped up. That's important, because it suggests this wasn't just some random, off-the-cuff comment. It looks more like a developing theme.
And yeah, these comments didn't just happen in a vacuum. The sources are pretty clear that they were directly connected to a big, frustrating fight over legislation. It was framed as a response to the other side blocking his agenda.
And then you have this. We see that same theme again, but in a totally different setting. Sure, the word changes from hate to despise, but let's be real. The message, the personal animosity toward political opponents, it's exactly the same.
All right, so that sets the scene for what happened recently. But it brings us to the really big question. Is this normal? Is there any precedent for this? Let's take a look back through history and see how past presidents spoke.
This is fascinating. Let's start with FDR. I mean, that guy was no stranger to a political brawl. But look closely at the difference here. He says, "I welcome their hatred." But who is they? It's organized money, a specific faction. He's not talking about the entire Republican Party. It's a very targeted, almost defiant stance, not this broad declaration against millions of his fellow Americans.
And then you've got Abraham Lincoln, and the contrast is even sharper. I mean, think about it. The country was literally tearing itself apart. And what was his public message? The exact opposite of hate. He was all about reconciliation. He actually told his followers to do good to those who hate you. And get this, he put his biggest political rivals in his cabinet, all in an effort to heal the nation.
Now look, let's not pretend other presidents were saints. They definitely got angry. Richard Nixon famously had his private enemies list. James Buchanan was privately calling Republicans treasonous. But here's the key thing the historical record shows us. There was a line, and that line was between private feelings and public statements. That animosity, it stayed behind closed doors. It didn't become a public speech declaring hate for huge chunks of the country. Okay, so we've looked at the modern statement, we've compared it to some heavy hitters from the past, which brings us to the main point our sources are making. Is this statement truly, well, unprecedented?
Think about it. You go through all the history books, all the fiery speeches, all the really nasty political fights, and you ask a simple question. How many US presidents have actually stood up in public and said, "I hate them," about their political opponents? According to all the analysis, the answer is 1.
And just to be super clear here, anger in politics, that's not new. Animosity, it's as old as the country itself. But what the sources say is unprecedented. What's a historical first is a sitting president saying it out loud, publicly declaring personal hate for the entire opposing party. It's that public, direct statement that seems to cross a line that wasn't crossed before.
Okay, so it's a historical first, got it. But the real question is, so what? Why should we care? What's the actual impact of a president saying this? Let's get into it.
You know, the sources we looked at are really clear on this. This isn't just about words. They draw a straight line from this kind of rhetoric to real-world consequences. See, when a leader uses language that is this direct, this adversarial, it's not just an opinion anymore. It sort of gives people permission to feel the same way. It reframes your opponents from, fellow citizens you disagree with into enemies that you should hate. And the sources argue that this is basically like pouring gasoline on the fire of political polarization.
And that really leaves us with a big critical question. We've seen the historical line that was crossed here, and we've seen the documented impact. So it really makes you think, if the words of our leaders can give people permission to hate, what other permissions are they granting? And how is that shaping the world that, we all have to live in together?